Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends at Mountain Rose Herbs. The folks at Mountain Rose Herbs are committed to providing us herbalists with high-quality, organic, and sustainable herbs, spices, essential oils, bulk ingredients, and much more. But quality isn't the only thing they're passionate about. They consider the environmental and social impact of every business decision they make, and are dedicated to keeping their business practices sustainable and ethical from start to finish. To Mountain Rose Herbs, people, plants, and planet are more important than profit. And Herb Rally podcast listeners can get 15% off their order at mountainroseherbs.com using coupon code 22RALLY15. That's 22RALLY15, all one word. So a huge thanks to Mountain Rose Herbs for sponsoring the podcast, and don't forget to use coupon code 22RALLY15 to get 15% off your next order. Now on to the show. Enjoy. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into the show. The content in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to cure, diagnose, treat, or prevent any disease. This information has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. We are not doctors, nor do we play one on the internet. Please seek advice from a qualified healthcare professional. Okay, MC Calico, take it away.
Yeah. Smoking herbal blends. We need some mullein and some kush, my brethren. While listening to Herb Rally podcast again. Herbalism at its finest with Mason Hutchinson. Yeah.
Hey everyone, this is Mason Hutchison, and welcome back to Herb Rally, your daily herbal podcast. We come out with new episodes about 5 days a week, so be sure to tune in often. Our goal for the show is to help you along your herbalist journey no matter what stage you're at. We have over 560 episodes, so feel free to peruse those episodes and you're bound to find something of interest. Today is part one of a 3-part series with Heather Irvine, and she's going to be teaching us all about Herbal First Aid. Now, Heather studied with Seven Song, who's famous for his Herbal First Aid knowledge, so a lot of her teachings are heavily inspired by him. But yeah, this is Heather's awesome Herbal First Aid class, and I really hope you enjoy it. If you'd like to get the full video, you could sign up for our 13 herbal freebies, and to do that, all you need to do is go to herbrally.com, and at the top of the page, you'll see a button that says freebies, or it's in the navigation menu, if you will. But yeah, basically all you do is you sign up for our email newsletter, which we send a few times per week, updating you on new YouTube videos, monographs, herbalism events, and whatnot. And in exchange, you get 13 herbal freebies along with an hour-and-a-half webinar with a slideshow. But yeah, today we're breaking it up into 3 parts for the podcast. But again, if you'd like the full hour-and-a-half video webinar, just sign up for our 13 herbal freebies and our newsletter, and you'll get it immediately. Next thing I want to do is read one of our Apple Podcasts written reviews, and this is a 5-star review from Heather Davis. She wrote this back in November of 2021, so about a year ago, and they say, "Have loved this podcast for such unique herbal info." And then they go on, "I've read the emails and listened to the podcast for years and love how unique it is. It pretty much brings the large herbal world all together in one place. Thank you, Mason." I got goosebumps reading that. Thanks so much for the nice review, Heather. Yeah, I know I say this every time, but it's really exactly what we're going for. We want to include as many voices as possible in the Herb Rally podcast, as well as just Herb Rally in general, whether that be the events that we publish or the YouTube videos, whatever. We're really just trying to create a diverse library of all sorts of herbalist views. So thank you again. And if you haven't left us a review in Apple Podcasts, would you take a moment and do that, pretty please, with the cherry on top? It really helps us out a lot. It shows others that this is a worthwhile herbalism podcast, and it always brings a smile to my face. So all you got to do is open up Apple Podcasts and click write a review. And if you're not using Apple Podcasts, you could always leave us some sort of star ranking and review. It tells the podcast provider that this is a good podcast, which I think it is, but maybe I'm a little biased. Anywho, thanks again. And last but not least, I wanted to promote our Herb Rally Schoolhouse. This is one of the ways that you all could help support the podcast and help support us here at Herb Rally. It's only $10 a month, and you can use coupon code podcast at checkout to try your first 30 days for free to see if it's something you're interested in. But basically what we do is we produce exclusive classes and content for our Herb Rally Schoolhouse members. To learn more, you could go to herbrally.com/schoolhouse. And again, if you enter coupon code podcast at checkout, you could get kind of a behind the scenes look at what we're all about at Schoolhouse. We are actually going to be producing a video here soon to show behind the scenes as well. But yeah, it really is one of the best ways you can help support us. Again, it's only $10 a month, and we greatly appreciate all of our members, and thank you all for the support. But in the meantime, I really hope you're enjoying the Herb Rally podcast. And now on to part 1 of the 3-part series with Heather Irvine on Herbal First Aid. All right, I will talk to you later. Have a great day. Bye.
Hi, herbalists. My name is Heather Irvine, and I have been working with herbs and with people with respect to medicinal plant use for close to 20 years. The topic I have at hand is Herbal First Aid, and probably most everything I will present to you today I learned first from Seven Song at the Northeast School of Botanical Medicine for me around 20 years ago. And almost everything that I present to you today, I have also used many times and seen work. And actually a lot of the things I was initially skeptical about before really having a chance to try them. And very early on in my learning, I had really a lot of opportunities to try them, particularly with this topic, first aid. Not only because the first school that I went to does build in some first aid experience in the form of service or volunteering, but also because while I was learning, I cohabitated with many people, and also young people, and also, after that, a bit more cohabitation on farms, and in various situations where someone might, be helped by a little bit of domestic medicine, at-home first aid, herbal first aid. I've also done a little bit of wilderness guiding in my younger years. And so that's another thing I ought to mention, which is that some of the things I may mention are a bit more in the context of what you might do if you didn't have the option to travel to sort of more standardized care. I say might and probably a bit because this is actually an older presentation I'm dusting off. It's never been to my memory, recorded for the web before, but I did present it 10 or 15 years ago. Okay, so let's get into some of these topics. The first thing that I want to say, there's a lot of text on this slide, which you may or may not be reading through, and that's okay. I will also summarize it for us. But another thing, separate from this slide, is that when it comes to herbal first aid or using medicinal plants in first aid, you want to always, always, always recognize any conventional first aid wisdom that you have learned in the way of what to do and not do. You want to not do anything super cavalier or cavalier at all beyond your scope of knowledge, and that really stands the same for herbal first aid. I have had some or been in some more harrowing situations where a person, to get to more emergency or more advanced care, I should say, needed to be carried out, in which case, if you have people with first aid knowledge around and or botanical first aid knowledge around, ideally both, you may be able to do some things safely or reasonably that you wouldn't necessarily do if the same incident occurred in a city or town where you can call for advanced care. It's there within a minute or so. Okay, so possible first aid situations. Some of this text I lifted directly from a little zine that I made ages ago, back when we made zines, back when we didn't have a lot of the technology we use now to teach. So, possible first aid situations that I have learned in, dealt with, seen, learned about, etc., and common situations. burns, allergic reactions, asthma, altitude sickness, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, sprains, strains, dislocation, muscle pain, poison ivy. Every year, right? Someone probably asks you about poison ivy. Dog bites, human bites, which is actually kind of worse psychologically, perhaps, and also microbially than some of the other bites. Snake bites, spider bites, external infections, ear infections, staph, strep throat, mouth and tooth pain, food and waterborne illnesses, headaches, migraine, fever, dehydration, bloody nose. Hey, that's a common one. Bleeding, panic attacks, a bad trip, drug withdrawal, seizures, being wired and tired, or someone who is extremely wired and tired, perhaps even moving towards psychosis, eye infections, eye afflictions, tear gas and pepper spray rashes, gynecological and genitourinary questions, communicating with unusual people, those soft skills, evacuating from the wilderness, problem people in the wilderness, and protecting yourself. Those are some of the really interesting things that I have learned about in doing wilderness first aid. There are also things to consider studying, learning about, talking about with peers who have experience if you really are serious about wilderness first aid. And they're all things that have been kind of addressed in the training I had in the Northeast School of Botanical Medicine and experienced firsthand. But first, we'll do some more pedestrian sorts of things. So for topical items, I have some topical items that come up first, and we'll focus on the plants, not on products or anything like that. So items for strains and sprains. One herb that some of you may be leaping up to suggest already is arnica, and absolutely you are right. It has a lot of versatility. We have Arnica camisonis and Arnica montana. Arnica montana is the one you'll see in commercial products more often and has a larger flower. But you can grow in a greater range of places. Arnica camisonis. Say that again. Arnica camisonis, easier to grow in a greater range of places. The flowers are smaller, but you have typically more of them. So this is a great item for just topically. I want to emphasize topical use because it's not really advised for internal use unless you have a really specific homeopathic product, which is very, 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 very dilute. But topically, it is said to kind of help speed or assist the resolution of inflammation, perhaps help to encourage circulation to the area. To help carry away some of the metabolites and the chemical signalers of inflammation. And I have really seen it bring swelling and bring redness down, but particularly swelling and pain as well. So that is one that many of you might be saying, well, I knew that already. And it can be used in salves or oils, or you can, if you have the dried flower, make poultices of it. If you have the fresh flower, which would be much more unusual, but possible in some situations, you can do a nice poultice by moistening or very lightly cooking the plant, and then between gauze pressing it onto an affected area. And I've actually seen that work really well, and I've heard from peers and other students who've tried it that way as well and seen it work quite well. If you are thinking you don't have arnica available, or what if you don't have arnica available when you need it, there are many alternatives that seem to have some similar actions. And one is St. John's wort. St. John's wort, similarly, we often think of it as the depression herb, but a lot of herbalists, self-included, like to think of it for a lot of topical uses as well, in resolving inflammation and reducing nerve pain and things of that nature. So that is a possibility that could be much more abundant in places, often is found in the wild. And yarrow. Yarrow, Achillea millefolium, is nearly always around in any place that I have lived and is pretty widespread worldwide. But maybe you need to know something even more widespread, more common to find, or that you can find more abundantly, and that would be, for example, willow. Now, I don't just mean the big willow trees, but willow shrubs, which are also really widespread and contain salicylates and can be very immediately anti-inflammatory topically. You might also know meadowsweet, Filipendula almaria, or you might know Spirea alba or other sorts of spireas, which are also called meadowsweet, and I would say are not quite as strong and aromatic and concentrated in salicylates so obviously as Filipendula almaria, but does do some, has some potential. It's certainly going to be tannic and a bit anti-inflammatory through salicylates as well. And, perhaps a little bit more abundant where you live or possible to find where you live. You could gather some of these things ahead of time for a little herbal first aid kit and have them dried for the possibility of making infusions, baths, poultices, etc. Or you could get to really know a lot of wild plants. It turns out that practically every plant out there has some astringent or tannic value, which can be somewhat helpful, and also some anti-inflammatory value. So there's many, 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 many that I have not even mentioned. A lot of rose family plants could be potentially useful as well. The theme is looking for things that are going to reduce inflammation and promote circulation. So start there. So let's go a step back and suggest things that are more of the superficial nature. I will say that some of you may be saying, wait, you didn't talk about ice and rice and everything nice for sprains and strains, but I'm going to focus on the things that are herbal and perhaps the information that's a little bit harder to access than all the conventional sports medicine and first aid, although you want to use those practices too, along with the herbs, or even use plants sometimes to try to achieve similar kinds of effects to what you've learned conventionally. So let's say we just have a rash, a random rash, a plant exposure rash, another irritation. So, of course, calendula is really lovely. This is probably kind of the boring one for many people. But let's talk about a little bit more of the kind of how and why. We know that it's rich in flavonoids. Okay, well, all plants are, and, that's going to be anti-inflammatory. We also know that it is antifungal. If you've handled calendula flowers, they're really resinous and sticky, and almost always resins have some additional antifungal value. And sometimes seem to have sometimes seem to be useful against rashes that are sort of a reaction to plant constituents, such as, poison ivy. We see some of the sort of folk remedies along the lines of grandelia and things that are somewhat resinous plants. Now, calendula is not going to be nearly as strong, but the things we love are that it's antifungal and anti-inflammatory and also sort of emollient or gently, in other words, soothing. It's going to sort of reduce irritation, perhaps keep moisture near. The resinous quality perhaps creates a little bit of a barrier. And we just generally see inflammation toned down a little bit with use of calendula. Maybe you don't have calendula. Maybe you want to look to wild plants or plants you're finding in a meadow or farmland. Elder flowers can also be used, similarly to how you might use calendula. Yarrow, yet again, comfrey, with some exceptions, which I'll hop into before long in the slides, and chickweed. Chickweed is a really common farmland kind of plant, Stellaria medii, and think of that as an amazing emollient and also a great anti-inflammatory. And of course, many people will think immediately of plantain, not the relative of bananas, but the lawn, the sort of common ground cover or plant growing low to the ground. Of course, you can use that as well. And jewelweed, let's put that in there too. But are there any other antifungals? Maybe something a little bit stronger? Yes. For something a little bit stronger, like let's say that someone has a bit more of an advanced sort of fungal overgrowth on skin, and you want to offer them something for that. Black walnut hulls, that is the green part that is sort of dense but spongy, sort of like a hardened sponge that occurs around the nut itself, and it often turns black. It oxidizes to black, and really you can make preparations of it, whether it is green or black, but I tend to try to harvest it while it's still mostly green. And that can be made into salves, oils, or powders, or liniments if you need. And black walnut is quite antifungal. It also stains the skin, so this is a little bit more of the sort of fungal overgrowth first aid nature of use, not as much the sort of beauty care regimen kind of use. But that's what we're doing today. Okay, but what if I don't have black walnut? I don't know what it is yet, or I just want to know some kind of, other climate or other preparations, perhaps maybe even a commercial preparation I can carry that would be nice and antifungal. Tea tree oil or tea tree preparations are quite good, almost superior to most anything else that can still be used really safely. And these, of course, come in the form of tea tree oil, essential oils, salves, ointments, liniments, and various astringent type products. But for a first aid, let's think about maybe perhaps a stronger salve, ointment, or liniment. And yes, we are in sort of the skin stuff right now, but I believe we are going to go quite a bit deeper. So what about the whole comfrey discussion? Let's pause there. So there is a lot of discussion about comfrey. So I'm going to focus it just on sort of the thought that we're using it topically for wounds and how to think about it in that context. So the often recited and true wisdom about comfrey is not to use it on wounds that are deeper than they are wide. I would agree. Why? The often recited wisdom is that it could potentially heal. Well, comfrey speeds healing of the skin. So it could potentially heal the tissue that it has the most contact with first on the outside and potentially cause an abscess by healing the outer tissue first. And then you have an area inside the body where, bacteria, infection, etc. may just, continue to fester and is now not very convenient or possible to clean out without creating injury again. So that's the idea there. Now, I once thought our herbalist kind of just talking up comfrey's game here with this whole little, don't do this wisdom about how comfrey speeds healing so fast. But then I have, presented with, applied some, really simple comfrey applications to various folks' burns, cuts, etc. and found that it really does seem to speed healing. So just think of Comfrey for issues that are either more at the surface or at least are not deeper than they are wide. Or you might say you're not going to use this with lacerations, incised wounds, anything that's really kind of a deep, don't use it over anything that's a deeper kind of cut or injury. Burns. Okay, so burns are moving a little bit more obviously into the sort of basic classic first aid category. Of course, aloe is a classic, really fairly well proven. Slippery elm bark as a powder, poultice, or even sort of decoction or infusion can be applied similarly to aloe. Of course, it's not the most sustainable choice overall among all plants, but sometimes with first aid, you're using things that, I always say, like, yes, we want to be sustainable, but if we're going to use plant-based medicine, we also want to use something that works. And slippery elm is sort of a standout among the demulcents. Comfrey, as we mentioned, Comfrey, we did that little, fact pause on the standard wisdom about Comfrey. Comfrey is yet another powerful and really abundant remedy that speeds healing. It is said to be a cell proliferant, which is part of the reason, is the reason that we had the issue that we talked about in the last slide or a minute ago. But if you do need to speed up healing, and you have something that's more superficial or just on the exterior, and is perhaps, a more broad than deep injury, like a burn usually will be, then Comfrey could be a really nice choice. So what else? Say we maybe don't have those three, or we want to know some additional plants to use with it. Think of tannic herbs with lots of tannins that are astringent, and you can taste that quality a lot of times in the teas. But you might also know that yarrow is quite astringent. You might know that all plants in the rose family are astringent. And you might know oak and willow bark and meadowsweet as classic astringents. That being said, so many plants, especially woody plants, are quite tannic and astringent. And then we have honey as a classic other kind of natural preparation used to speed healing, prevent infection. And what else about honey? It has natural peroxides. Why is it that, honey never spoils? Why is it that if a little bit of kind of organic debris goes into the honey, it kind of seems to disappear in time? Honey has natural peroxides that sort of break down debris, bacteria, etc. So, that is more than just the love of honey that has yielded into that kind of more widespread and sometimes even hospital-oriented use of honey with burns. Okay, so herbal first aid caveats. Oh, this is probably the part that I sort of mentioned in the beginning. Herbs do work, but not always. Okay, so trust in nature, but to an extent only. These aren't, there are no panaceas, in other words. Also, sometimes you may have seen a plant work in a sort of emergency situation or work very quickly at an action like, reducing somebody's sort of emotional alarm or, relaxing and opening up their breathing. Or you may have thought that you've seen a particular plant reduce sort of an allergic reaction. It doesn't mean that that plant is going to perform for every person as well as you have seen it once. There are many, many different factors going into that person's situation, case, physiology, response to the plant, etc. One of the things about drugs is they are quite, something becomes a drug by being really replicable and really sort of one-directional and having a standard predictable response, which isn't 100% the quality of drugs, but I'm just saying herbs can do a lot, and I've been astonished over and over at how well and how much plants can work with a human body for the better. But you can't count on the same results as you have heard about or as you have seen once or that you just hope will occur. All right, wilderness first aid requires critical thinking always. So you have to be a little bit of a strategist, and you have to be very present to the moment, but you also have to be thinking ahead a little bit about what could go wrong, and be thinking ahead a little bit about, potentially getting a person to more care if they need. And you need to be thinking ahead and backwards about what possible causes are and what are possible causes and scenarios that could get a person to a certain presentation, rather than making assumptions that it's either the most alarming or the most common thing. Some people tend to go one way and some the other. Some always see the most common cause, some see the most sort of harrowing and worrisome. Wilderness first aid does apply, or does not apply everywhere. Wilderness first aid does not apply everywhere. Wilderness first aid applies to the wilderness. It does not apply to every situation that a person loving medicinal plants sees an application for it. It does not, does not apply to plants being more like healthful or safer than conventional medicines. Because remember, with first aid, we're often talking about responding to a one-time event. And that's when drugs can be super helpful and conventional care can be super helpful at minimizing overall harm to a person. So wilderness first aid applies when you are in the wilderness or can't get a person to more care, or for some of these sort of beginning, more sort of pedestrian types of issues. That's maybe a little step aside from this, things that make sense to take care of at home. Always call for advanced life support if needed. You want to be able to have a person have delivered to a person, or have a person be delivered to supplemental oxygen, drugs, or even surgery, and an expert evaluation if they could need any of those soon. And always make way for more experienced health care professionals immediately. Don't get in the way. It's not about you, so don't get in the way. All right, so those are some of our first aid caveats. But we have a few more of the sort of common things first. So let's talk about nausea. Nausea is something that is very commonly experienced. My two favorites that I learned early on, both with Seven Song, both I have used over and over and over and over and over for myself and for others, are peppermint or peppermint spirits and ginger. Ginger in its various forms: powdered ginger, tincture, candied ginger, my favorite. You can actually crystallize it yourself very easily without a lot of culinary skills or even effort or precision. And then peppermint or peppermint spirits. I have really liked something called peppermint spirits, which is a peppermint tincture that you make quite strong. And then in that, I'm not big on consuming essential oils at all. But you can make a product that is, per 1 ounce of peppermint tincture, about 1 or maybe 2 or 3, but I usually do 1 drop of peppermint essential oil. That just makes it more potent, and it makes it so that a person whose stomach is really so unwell and uneasy that they can't take in anything, not water, not ice, not anything, they can then just take like a drop or 2 of peppermint spirits on their tongue, and often experience some relaxation of or ease of that sensation of nausea. So it's just a way to get a concentrated product in a very, very small delivery.
And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the Herb Rally podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us here at Herb Rally, we now have a text message community, believe it or not. Basically, it's just updates from us. We send about 1 to 7 texts per week, notifying you about new events, videos, courses, podcasts. You get the idea. It's pretty much like our email newsletter, just in text form. So if you'd like to receive text messages from Herb Rally, just text JOIN, that's JOIN, to the number 541-256-2895. Again, that's JOIN to number 541-256-2895. And to stop receiving texts, that's easy too. Just text STOP to the same number. It'll opt you out immediately. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your day.